Julie Simmons. Welcome to Quantum Astrology. This afternoon we're going to discuss returns in specific. I talked a little bit about what returns are in general, but I thought a good way to start is this way. Every year you celebrate your birthday. Of course, we all celebrate our birthdays. The reason we celebrate our birthdays, astrologically speaking though, is because every year the sun, which is the sun in a chart represents the heart's desire. It's the thing you most want to achieve and radiate in your life. Once a year, the sun returns to the place where it was when you were born. And that's your solar return. And that's your birthday. And of course, we celebrate it. Why not? So that's one idea of how a return works. We could celebrate our moon returns every month, but that would get a little boring. Although there are many astrologers who do set up a chart for their lunar return every month, and that tells them something that they like to use. I try and avoid the too much information thing myself, but still that can be useful. But the returns the return that most everybody has heard about is the Saturn return. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about Jupiter returns because they're very important. But I think I'll talk before that about the Mars return, because Mars returns are interesting. Mars returns every 2.5 years in your chart, and the first Mars return is, of course, the most important one, because that's when you're 2.5 and you're in your terrible twos year. And of course, Mars and Venus are a pair. Venus is about love, and Venus is about yes, and Mars is about no. Mars is about, I will decide if I'm going to do that. And the first Mars return of your life, when you're 2.5, is exactly about that. It's about when a human being has to figure out their no and the power of no in their lives and how to use it, right? And so you can be a little bit rambunctious when you're 2.5 because you're trying to figure out how no works. But take it from me, if your no doesn't work, your yes isn't going to be very good in this life. So every 2.5 years we have an opportunity to reorient ourselves towards how we use that assertive energy in our charts that Mars represents. So that's another example of a return that you don't hear a lot about, but certainly that first one is very important. So then there's the Saturn return. So Saturn takes approximately 27 to 29 years, somewhere in there, to go around the chart once. And when it does, we call that a Saturn return. So Saturn is the farthest out planet that you can see with the naked eye, and it is the slowest moving planet that you can see with the naked eye. So in the 1700s, they invented the telescope, but until the invention of the telescope, so for hundreds of thousands of years before that, astrology was all about naked eye, what you could see with the naked eye, and that was it. So Saturn, because it's so slow to go around, became the planet that indicates time and experience and age, and it's really the respect that we need to have for the circumstantial realities of our lives, that the things that we can only learn through experience. So when you have a Saturn return, it's a very important threshold in terms of what stage of life you're at, what's going to be expected of you, what you have to step up to, what your responsibilities are going to be. So the first Saturn return is the threshold between childhood. It's childhood's end for sure, and it's the beginning of adult life in earnest. Now, 27-year-old people don't feel like children, that's for sure, but that line that you cross, just before you're 30, enters you into the reality of the material life. Are you going to have a house? Are you going to have kids? What kind of job are you going to have? And most importantly, what kind of expertise are you going to develop in your adult life? Because truly, your adult life only lasts 29 years until your next Saturn return. And at the Saturn return after that, you become an elder. And, we don't really talk about the difference between adult and elder much. We have old people, and we have senior citizens, and we have younger people. But really, astrology shows us that there's a real difference between being an adult and being an elder. And so that threshold you cross at around just before you're 60, in your late 50s, is also a strong demarcation line. So basically in your adult life, you are developing your expertise, and in your elder life, it's not that there's nothing left to develop, but it's that you're really looking at what have I learned from all this effort that I've put into making my life as good as I could make it. Now, what I always like to say to people is, if you had a really rotten adult life, you had 12 kids and hated every one of them or something, and all you did was drudgery, you still have expertise in that particular area, and you still need to figure out what you learned, because that's what the nature of elderhood is it's that sense of sharing and mulling over, and using what it is we learned. I think elders are meant to poke at the status quo, really. That's our job, mostly. And of course, you can always read my book, Earned Wisdom, and learn lots more about that. But there's another Saturn return that happens in your late 80s that didn't used to be so noticeable, but people are living so much longer. We now have the third Saturn return, which ushers in the fourth Saturn cycle, and I have dubbed this all by myself. I call this the realm of the living ancestors. So I think after you're an elder, you become a living ancestor. And the reason I think that is because by the time you're in your late 80s and 90s, it's obvious that you're old. You can't really hide it anymore. And in a very real sense, that is a period of life, if you're so lucky to get there, where you live between the worlds, where you have, people see you and they really think about what it means to be old, and you're sort of ancient. And yet, if you have all your faculties, there's a tremendous amount of depth and insight and very introverted understanding that you have of life, which really is about being between the worlds. So that's what Saturn returns are all about, and they're very important, and I think it's very important to understand those transitions. Jupiter returns are a little bit less obvious, but they're important. Jupiter is about what we learn. Jupiter has everything to do with what we believe in, and what we believe in, if we're intelligent beings, should be based on what we learn. So the first Jupiter return of our lives is when we're 12, and that's when all those changes are happening in the brain and in the body, and that's when we begin to think that our parents don't know everything in earnest, right? Now, I realize this isn't the same for everybody, and the internet has changed things. Kids are growing up faster, but you still only have your Jupiter return when you're 12, and to be honest, you're really not ready to take on the philosophies of the world before you're 12, and you're only just beginning at 12. And a lot of, in traditional religions and stuff like that, that's the age when we confirm people, or they were bar mitzvah or whatever, because that's when you are meant to be welcomed into a belief system that is important and means something to you. And so every 12 years, you have a question in your life or an issue in your life around what you believe in, what you need to learn, and how you should, adjust that. What's interesting about the Jupiter return is that only once in your life, Jupiter and Saturn return together. And that's when you're 60, 59, 60. You have a Saturn return and a Jupiter return within a year of each other. And so that's a big part of the becoming an elder thing is, that's where the question comes into it about, are you wise yet? Or what do you still need to do to get wise? So those are some of the most interesting and meaningful returns: the birthday return, the Mars return, the Saturn return, and the Jupiter return. And I hope you find that useful. Thank you for coming. Bye.